The vice president of the United States is melting down at one of us pro-Ukrainian YouTubers. Just what did old Jake Bro say to set off the VP? And is Jake 100% right and has kind of humiliated the DOD? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about this dumb one. So, this is Jake Bro's take. He pointed out that in a White House meeting between the president and key members of his cabinet and President Zelensky of Ukraine, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth was rocking a Russian flag tie. Right? You may note here that the colors are actually, this is much more similar to the Russian flag than to the American flag, right? And I point this out because, well, here's the Russian flag. The Russian tricolor, right, is white, blue, and red in equally spaced bars. 1/3 white, 1/3 blue, 1/3 red. And as you can see from the picture here, 1/3 white, 1/3 blue, 1/3 red. This is clearly, deeply, it is the Russian flag. It is a Russian flag tie. And Jake Bro points this out. He says, you showed up to a meeting with President Zelensky wearing the flag of his adversaries, the people actively trying to annihilate his country, the people who sent death squads to kill him. I don't know what else to tell you. That's a bad look, especially when you are going to sit down and tell Zelensky that because that adversary, that person who's trying to annihilate your country from existence, who tried to kill you, had a phone call with your boss, and now your boss has decided to completely reverse his stance that he's been committed to for the last 2 weeks, and instead say, listen, you should just give Putin what he wants. He definitely won't invade you a third time. No, we can't make any promises. Truly brilliant diplomacy in action. But here's what I want to point out. Jake Bro is like, dude, you wore a Russian flag tie. He says these people love Putin and Russia. And the vice president dropped in and said, or maybe he was wearing the colors of America. Now, JD Vance doesn't even appear to understand the problem. But you know who does understand how big of a fuck up this is Russia. See, the Russian ambassador to the United States, Kirill Dmitriev, or he's actually technically the Russian ambassador to the Trump administration, which is a weird role. Kirill Dmitriev replied to this photo with a picture of the Russian flag, as though to say, shout out to Pete Hegseth for rocking the Russian flag, and then dropped in a very strange take, which is WWG1WGA, which is where we go one, we go all, and then a handshake. Now, and then in response to JD Vance, Kirill Dmitriev added, maybe it's good that we have the same colors, and a handshake. So what is Kirill Dmitriev trying to do here? What he's trying to do is double down on this message to imply, right, where we go one, we go all, is a QAnon phrase, right? You may notice that QAnon has basically died because the movement assumed that there was a vast conspiracy for Trump to restore himself to the presidency, which never happened. He ended up having to just win a normal election. But the idea was that there was a vast network of people underground supporting the Trump administration, all working together secretly. And so Kirill Dmitriev is implying, trying to feed the fire of the rumor that there is a conspiracy that Russia and the Trump administration are working together to stick it to Ukraine and stick it to the West. I don't know if it's true, but imagine you are Zelensky and you go into a meeting where you're about to get some bad news from your White House contacts. They're about to tell you that you should surrender, something you've made clear is not going to happen, that the overwhelming majority of Ukrainians agree should not happen, that surrendering or yielding or giving Russia what they want is a recipe for Russia to take the rest of your country. Now, the White House is about to tell you that you should just bail. And then you walk into the room and the White House's Secretary of Defense, your point man, is wearing the flag of your enemy. even let's like the Pete Hegseth should know better. Someone in the entire Pentagon, not one person looked at that outfit and was like, Pete, you're wearing a Russian flag. Why don't you switch it out for a red tie? Take my tie. Take anyone else's tie. And that, I think, is like the problem. You can see that another official government Twitter account said, isn't it humiliating so publicly admitting that you're a weapons grade moron? And I think that response, they're trying to dunk on Jake Bro, but actually that response applies to JD Vance. The reason is because JD doesn't understand the problem. That's how amateurish JD Vance is when it comes to international diplomacy. He doesn't understand that it doesn't matter that Pete Hegseth may have, been, had his hair of the dog and looked at his tie collection and said, sick, red, white, and blue stripes today, bro. Right? It doesn't matter that that's what he thought, because what matters is he walked in to that meeting wearing the flag of the country that tried to genocide Ukraine to meet with the Ukrainian president. This is the difference between diplomacy and hanging out with your boys, running a do-nothing charity, which is Pete Hegseth's only leadership experience, is that you get a pass with this sort of stuff when you're running a five-man organization. When you're running the largest warfighting and military and diplomatic effort, when you are the leader of the free world, these are the mistakes you don't get to make. And we know it's a mistake because America's adversaries, Russia, are doubling down on it. They're leaning into it. They're amplifying the message. A complete unforced error. You know what would have been a good tie? Blue. Because it's in the Ukrainian flag and the Russian flag. And it at least sends a message to Ukraine that, hey, we're going to give you some bad news, but we're giving you this news as a friend. They're not a friend. They don't have a policy. They are just doing whatever the president decides to do, and the president appears to have some level of dementia. But if you are trying to message that, if that's what you're trying to project as Pete Hegseth, then that's the kind of symbology that you do. You don't sit there and go, you thought we were friends? Sorry, buddy, I'm wearing the Russian flag. And then the Russians go, yeah, we are allies. Yeah, we're, in fact, in a vast conspiracy, you and me, to work together to do something. So the fact is, the really embarrassing part is that the vice president doesn't understand how this is a fuck up. Like, he literally doesn't seem to comprehend that it's less of a problem that, yeah, sure, the Trump administration won their first election because of vast sweeping Russian interference, and that's not a conspiracy theory. Trump calls it a hoax, but he also calls the Jeffrey Epstein a hoax, and we know how real that is. No, that's a bipartisan Senate committee chaired by current Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who said that. So yeah, the Trump administration definitely has a favorable view of Russia. I think that's pretty obvious, right? And they hate Ukraine just like they hate interfering with any foreign conflict that isn't at the behest of Israel or inexplicably Argentina. But the fact that JD Vance does not understand that diplomacy is about some of this messaging, that these signals mean something, because they mean something to your enemies. When you fuck it up, your enemies are going to dunk on you. So the fact is that it appears that Jake Bro, he took a shot at the king, so to speak. But you know what? Jake Bro didn't miss. He is 100% correct. So anyway, there's plenty of other stuff to talk about, but boy, I would be remiss to not recognize one of my peers having the vice president have a total fucking meltdown and expose himself as not having a fucking clue about diplomacy. Hit subscribe. Thanks so much, guys. AL90, James Porsche, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alex, William Alex, Henry Roussier, all of our guys at Combat Vet News that support me. I appreciate you. Of course, you can become one of these members, and if you don't want to be publicly associated with the channel, I understand. We're increasingly on the wrong side of the government, but you know what? We're on the right side of history. See ya.